請勿靠近車門。
請不要靠近車門。
Please stand back from the doors.
Hello, listeners. Welcome back to another episode of What Kind of Asian Are You podcast. I am your host. My name is Kyle. And if you're new around, thank you for tuning in for the very first time. This is a podcast where I interview diaspora Asians or Asians worldwide about their life stories and experiences. We look to highlight, amplify, and validate Asian voices and provide you with Asian stories that are entertaining, inspirational, and just interesting as a whole, where hopefully you'll learn something or feel inspiration to do whatever you want to do in life. And today's guest that we have is a very special one. And it's a special one because we have this person on before, and this person was really great. And I just want to highlight this person more because last time we highlighted a particular part of this person's life, and I think it's time to highlight the other part of their life as well. And before I get to there, I just hope that everyone listening, if you want to support this podcast, just make sure to keep listening, keep sharing this with your friends and family that you think will benefit from listening to this podcast, and follow the Instagram at What Kind of Asian Pod. And we have a YouTube too, so check it out. And it's also What Kind of Asian Are You podcast. And now I want to bring my guest in because this guest has been doing a lot since we last spoke on the podcast, because I think it was in March when we were talking on the podcast, and now it's been 9 months, and in this 9 months, this person's been doing so much during the pandemic still, and I'm excited to catch up with this person and talk to this person. So without further ado, this is Emery Fung from Awkward Turtle at Work. Hi Emery, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks for having me back on. It's been a while. Excited to chat.
Life updates in general in terms of what you have been doing personal life wise, and just your work life, and just podcasting, because I feel like you have done so many things that we didn't really talk about before, and now you're like doing, and it's incredible.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, a lot has happened since the last time I went on this podcast, and to be fair, that was kind of when I first started, kind of being a bit more out there, doing more kind of online stuff as well. So it's great to kind of now at the end of the year kind of look back and say, oh my god, I've actually done a lot more than kind of what I plan out to do, which is always a good thing, I think. So yeah, I think since I was on the podcast, I started a new job, which I started in May this year. Basically, still what I do, still a recruitment agency, but basically it's a fully remote work. So which means that I have a lot more time in terms of saving time from the commute, saving time, having lunch, and actually can work through lunch as well when I'm doing my own thing. And then it's just been a life changer because I've been a bit more, I guess, flexible in terms of my time. I'm actually able to schedule my own things according to my own time. So it's definitely been a great change. And I think a lot of what I've done so far is down to the reason I chose this job is because I needed more flexibility for me to kind of be out there and have more time to myself and do my other work aside from kind of my day job. And because of all this wonderful thing with the job I have, I've got the luxury of having more time. I live for myself, so it's just been a great kind of tool for me to kind of push on and do more things. And since we last spoke, we caught up a little bit between the podcast recording. So obviously I went to Thailand, which is one of the most like surreal experience that I've had in my life because it was a travel during the pandemic. I was lucky enough to be able to work with the Thailand tourism book out here in Hong Kong to help them to promote LGBT travel in Asia, especially kind of given Thailand obviously is a big country where they really rely on tourism. I mean, the most of the country rely on tourism, so that's kind of the reason why we went there and kind of, I guess, somehow kind of be like a lab rat to kind of see what the measures are like during COVID when they travel, which I was super impressed with because I think the precautions they have in Thailand, especially where I went to, what I saw, has a lot more precaution than we have in Hong Kong in terms of how they do their safety in the hotels and quarantines and whatnot. So I was super impressed, and I think it's I felt very safe, and also is a bit of a real time kind of going to Thailand. So I went to Koh Samui. And I've never been there before. I didn't know what to expect, but it's a very obviously hot tourism spot that people go to. And from what I hear, is usually obviously packed with people most of the time. I was lucky enough to go there during the pandemic, where there was barely anyone there. So I think we were actually there on the first day Koh Samui opened their borders. And so when we landed, I think there was about 10 people who's not from Koh Samui on the entire island. So the entire island was aware that we were coming, and they all greeted us at the airport. We were just so amazing and surreal. And then, it's kind of bittersweet because it's obviously great that I get to travel, and for a lot of it is for fun as well. But seeing kind of how quiet the tourism places were during the pandemic, kind of seeing it firsthand and kind of listening and speaking to the locals, it was a very bittersweet and surreal, weird moment. But of course, I really appreciate the opportunity, and it's kind of given me more of a, I guess, different perspective as well in terms of how I can do content. Because I think at first I was like, oh, I'll just do the career stuff, and then that's that. But that kind of opened up a bit more doors for me as well, which is really exciting.
Yeah. And with this kind of travel opportunity that you had to Thailand during COVID, that's, I think, a large portion have to do with the fact that you've been like in like the whole LGBT kind of like sphere in terms of advocating for things and all that stuff, in addition to your podcast. So let's talk about updates for your podcast, because since the last time we spoke on the podcast, you have done so much with your podcast in terms of episodes, guests, and like the growth you have made there. So talk about that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's been a great thing to kind of be consistent at. I'm going to be taking a small break running up to Christmas. Just kind of a month off, just kind of refresh some of the ideas and things. But I think now I'm on episode 27 at the time of recording. So yeah, and then I think before we spoke about this before off air, where the first season I did a solo podcast that only lasted about 13 episodes. So I'm almost kind of going, well, I just doubled it actually, to what I did in the first season. And yeah, so it's nice to know, or it's a great kind of, I guess, achievement for myself, where I kind of just kept going at it kind of every week. I had to make some changes along the way to make it bi-weekly instead of weekly, just because the workload that I was having. But I think the great thing about podcasts is that you can actually do whatever you want, in a sense where whatever suits you. And I'm sure you kind of feel the same way as well, when you've got something in life, or whatever it may be, or you've got too much stuff at work or that kind of stuff. It is us, it is our podcast. So we get to choose and get to kind of do whatever we want with it. And the really fun thing about podcasting that I did recently was that I went to this, I spoke at this kind of Hong Kong International Literacy Festival, alongside some other great podcasters in Hong Kong. So Regina Larkle, who was also on my podcast a few months ago. I think she was episode 14. She runs #Impact, basically like a organization where she helps a lot of people to do podcasting, as well as kind of spreading the word about kind of impacts business. So like NGO, sustainability, that kind of stuff is what she does. So she hosted a panel. She invited me. She had 2 other podcasters in the changing room, by Cissy Radford, and also a Kelly Support Group, which is kind of like a NGO for a lot of to do with mental health here in Hong Kong as well. And then we had like a panel talking about how great podcasting was, and how we got started, what the journeys, what the ups and downs. So that was like our first kind of ever thing that to speak about being a podcaster. So that was quite cool. So that was my first kind of time being on stage as well. So that was really exciting things to try.
And another thing that happened because of your podcast, that you got featured on a news article, or like the Beat. We also did for What Kind of Asian Are You, but I also saw you out there. I was like, wow, he's just getting everyone that I know there. Can you just talk about that? Because I think this is your first time on, not your first time on press for Awkward Turtle and all that stuff, but it's one that, for an online publication that's still big.
Yeah. Definitely, I think the first one that is very much the podcast focus. I think the previous ones that I've done mostly have either been because I fall into the gay games, and so a lot of the press has been kind of on behalf of gay games. So a lot of them has kind of been LGBT focus. So that was like the first online press that was about kind of purely, or the main focus was also about the podcast. And it's just nice to know that there's I'm getting some kind of traction as well. because when you start anything new, it's very hard to know how you're doing, especially in the first like 6-7 months. So it's really nice to know that it's actually getting picked up, and obviously having these presses hopefully going to help even more as well.
Yeah, it's really surreal when you get asked to, you want to be on this kind of article or whatnot, and because we found you somehow, like.
Yeah, and I'm always like, how did you find me? I'm always curious, especially kind of the new ones. I'm like, but it's always a nice feeling, right?
Especially when they tell you, I just found you through the algorithm, and because like you would never expect that to happen, because you don't know how the algorithm actually work.
Yeah, no one does.
And continue with like updates. It's like you also did a TED Talk. Can you talk about that? That's huge.
Yeah, so saying yes to doing the electricity festival that I just spoke about was one big reason was that I wanted to try being on stage before my TEDx. So that was a great practice, because when I spoke at that festival, I was so nervous, I was so nerve-wracking. I remember being on stage. Obviously, it was a panel, so there was this point, obviously, where I didn't speak, and then I just remember thinking to myself, "Oh my god, I must sound awful. I don't know what I'm talking about." All this stuff was going through my head, so it was definitely a good kind of a practice run before the big stage. That I was able to kind of see what the lighting is like, what it feels to be on stage. Because I've never done anything like that before. I never was into theatre. I was never really into anything on stage when I was in school. So all of this is very new. And since I've been doing more like, speaking stuff and podcasting and all that kind of stuff, it's always been in the pandemic time. So everything I've done has been virtual. So again, it was like a really nice kind of test run to see kind of what it's like in a physical kind of space. So that helped me a lot of TEDx. But basically TEDx was what kind of came about really kind of just through the people that I know within the gay games community. And they were asking if I would be interested, and I kind of just put my name in, and I said, oh yeah, I would be open to explore. Didn't think much of it, didn't think I would get it. I just put my name for it and see what happens. Didn't hear back for ages, so I thought, well, I probably don't have it then. So it was after 2 months after I put my name in, they came back and contacted me and said, we've actually been looking at your profile for about the last 2 months. We're looking at your podcast, we're looking at your stuff you do online, and we'd love to kind of have you speak. But let's have a chat and see what your thoughts are, how we can kind of how we can have you on as speaker. So thank God that I've been doing stuff consistently still in the background, which is always nice to know that whatever you do, you may not get like attention straight away, but someone out there somehow will come across your work you've done in the past. And that's what you kind of, I guess, that's kind of your credentials, if you like. So never underestimate the work that you do, I guess, that you put out there, even though it might not seem that people are looking at it, someone somehow will pick it up. So yeah, so after 2 months, they came back, and then we had a call. It was actually the same time I was in Thailand for, so that was a great thing that I as like a bonus to the trip, that I was able to kind of have this discussion as well. And then we kicked off kind of the rough topic that they wanted me kind of speak at, and then it was just about kind of me writing a script. They also actually had to, after the call, they also had to go back to the team and kind of finalize the list. So it wasn't like 100% confirmed. It was like a 60% confirmed, but not quite. We needed to confirm the team. So I was still kind of waiting around for the final yes. But I just remember kind of thinking about in my head in the script that I wanted to talk about. I didn't want to write it down, because I didn't want to be like, I've written this down, and then what if they come back and say no? So I was playing it in my head for ages every day. And then luckily they came back and said, yes, we've spoken to you, we'd love to have you on. So yeah, and then after that, it was a lot of process of writing. And you basically get a lot of support as well from the TEDx kind of the committee and curator. And they kind of tell you the outline, what you should expect. They give you like this handbook about kind of what you can do, what you can practice, how you can practice. So there's a lot of material to go through as well. And then you're just back and forth writing scripts. And then it took me maybe about a month and a bit to kind of finalize kind of the final script. In the meantime, because I've never done anything like this before, I really wanted to have as much support and kind of, I guess, advice and tips, as much as the material I can look at as much as I can. And I actually reached out to Lara, which is one of the guests that I had on the show, back in, I think, episode 3 or whatever it was. She was one of the early ones that I had. And shout out to Lara if she's listening, because she helped me tremendously a lot during this TEDx, because I asked her, she basically is a life and executive coach, and I was like, oh, maybe she would know something about public speaking. And she's an ex-lawyer, so she must have really good writing skills and all that kind of stuff. So I reached out to her, and she very kindly said, not my expertise, but I'm happy to link you up with people that I know in the area or the community that I have, who might know a thing or two about public speaking. So she actually kind of connected me with a bunch of people who's either done TEDx before or has either kind of trained people who's done TEDx before, which was a great help, because I think there's never enough help you can get for doing like a solo thing on stage. So that was a really great thing that I had. And it's not like people will tell you exactly what you need to say and what you need to do, but it's just nice to kind of pick off different ideas from different people, because obviously everyone is different, right? So it's just nice to kind of get ideas from different people and maybe like test a few lines to the people who's done it before and see their reaction, and just kind of see if this is a good idea to do, or what kind of reaction I should get if I say a certain line or like a certain topic. So that was really helpful. And the funny thing was that I actually printed my script and laminated it and put it in my shower. So when I was memorizing my script, I had it in my shower. A lot of people like to sing in the shower. A lot of people think shower is a safe space. It was exactly the same thing for me, but it was more to do with my script. So for like 3-4 weeks, I had my script on the shower. I was memorizing kind of like 3 pages by 3 pages, and just learning it every day and just talking it every day out loud. And as well as that, because we were still in Hong Kong, you still had to wear a mask everywhere you go. So it was good that I was actually able to mumble to myself every commute I was doing, just kind of just murmurate kind of my line and just kind of going through that. So it was quite a fun and weird kind of experience to prepare for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And you have finally done it, and then we're just waiting for the video to release. And when it's
Yes,
released,
yeah.
I'm excited to watch it and learn from it. And I think this kind of great kind of transition to what I wanted to have you come on in the first place, which is share
Mm.
the other side of your story that we didn't get to talk about last time when you were on. So I guess to kind of get the ball rolling would be to like talk about the title of your TEDx talk and go from there. Can you just share with us like what was the title of that talk?
Yeah. Oh, I actually haven't finalized my title yet, because the video's not
Oh,
uploaded yet. But I'll come back to you on that. But I can let you know kind of what the talk was. I'm not sure if I actually mentioned this in the last time I was here, but I think we may have touched on it. But basically, long story short, I was born female, but identify myself as male from as long as I can remember. I've always felt that way. I might not have the right language or the right vocab when I was younger to kind of express it out loud, especially when we didn't have Facebook or Instagram and all that kind of stuff to kind of learn off the entire kind of LGBT community. So it wasn't maybe until maybe I was a teenager that I was able to kind of exactly use the words to say, this is me, this is how I feel, da 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 da. And so the TEDx really was about using my personal story and bits and pieces about the podcast that I do and kind of merge the two together. So basically, the message is really to let people know that you can find yourself. You should go out there and explore who you are and what you are, what your interests are, what your passions are, and going out there and try it. And what I basically talks about is kind of with the example where I made a post on LinkedIn to come out as transgender about 1.5 2 years ago in Hong Kong. And the reason really was purely because I work in sales. I needed people to know my new name, Emery, and my email address. So it was a standardized way to say to my clients and candidates that this is how you can find me. And the reaction was just overwhelmingly positive. Like, people reached out and congratulated me. I had my high school teachers reaching out. I had my old bosses reaching out saying congrats. I had strangers reaching out. So that was a really nice thing to see and to witness, because I also think I was lucky in the sense where I posted a time that I posted, because I think maybe 2 years ago, if I posted the exact post, the reaction may be very different. It might not be 100% positive. Even maybe 5 years ago, I think the reaction will be very, very mixed. So I was lucky enough where I kind of rode the wave of the DNI and that kind of stuff in the recent years. And yeah, so I wrote the post. And since the post, it's led me to volunteer with gay games. It's led me to doing more speaking stuff. It's led me to Thailand. It's led me to TEDx. It's led me to do all these amazing things that I've never thought I'll be able to do. And so the script of the tech test really is about kind of finding exactly who you are. And by doing that, it's really to go out and just do something. It might not seem relevant at the time when you do things, but you never know what it will lead you. So for me, it was writing that post, and it just snowballed into this massive thing that I'm doing at the moment. All these things that I never expected I would be doing. And it could be anything that you'd be doing. It could be doing one thing. I don't know, going for a walk, and then you might meet this person that might introduce you to someone else. You just never know. So the idea really is to kind of encourage people to really kind of go out there and just try different things and just see how you feel. You might not be great at it at first, but you never know. Like we both, me and you, Carl, we started a podcast, and I think we can probably say that our lives has changed quite a lot since we started a podcast. And I've met people. I've met you. I've met Lara. I've met all these amazing people who I think I can call my friends. And you guys keep kind of giving me support and all this connection that we're having as well. So again, you just never know what doing one thing will lead you to, and that's kind of what I'm kind of really trying to push the message out, and kind of using that as my personal story to kind of give some like real life examples where this actually works.
That's great. And I guess another thing I just thought of just from hearing what you said and all that stuff is just like being the most authentic you will lead you to a lot of positive things. And honestly, I think your life opens up when you be the truest of who you are and what you believe in, and just let the world know. And I think you show that perfectly. And for those that really want to get more specific into your transition story, they could always listen to your episode that you did in season 1 of your podcast, where you just go through it, and like you made it where it's very like relaxing, or not relaxing, but more like less kind of educational, this is what happened and stuff, more kind of like chill, whereas like it's just a friend telling you what happened. And like if you want to hear that, definitely check that out, and I'll have links for that below. And to go over kind of your transition story on this podcast a little bit, can you just talk about like at what, or just guide us through like how it all started, kind of like what led you to like, you're I know it's like lifelong journey, of course. And let's, I guess, start from the very beginning of like, how did that kind of thought, like things might not be what everyone expect of me, or like things are different for me, like can you just talk about that and we go from there?
Yeah. Of course, yeah. So it's a really good question. Well, I think before I go into that, I have to stress that obviously this does differ across everyone in the entire LGBT community, not just the LGBT, also in the heterosexual community, where everyone's got different experiences when they first kind of question their own sexuality, or when they have a first crush. And things like that, right? So everyone's different. For me, it was definitely very natural, and I would say I was very sure that that's how I felt, even though I might not be able to express it in words, but I've always just known that I felt like I was a boy. And I guess, without being, I guess, very stereotypical, is that when I was younger, I have an older sister. She did the ballet, the piano, the artsy stuff. In the summer, when we, in Hong Kong, a lot of people have tutoring, all that kind of stuff. So she took all of the classes. We were only 3.5 years apart, but I did all the sports stuff. So I did swimming, football, ping pong, badminton, whatever it may be. I went for hikes a lot with my dad. So without kind of going to do deep about what happened when I was young, it was just very natural that I was drawn to those things. I'm not saying that every boy would need to do sports to be a boy, but that's just naturally what I really enjoy doing, and majority of the time was a very a boyish thing to do, especially kind of in Hong Kong, being a girl. It's not encouraged that you run around. It's not encouraged that you run around at school. It's encouraged to have tutor lessons and have homeworks and whatever. But I was kind of the exact opposite. And that always made me feel a bit different. But I never was really. I didn't feel alienated. I just felt I was different, but in a good way. And then I think and then I left Hong Kong, and then obviously went to the boarding school in the UK, and that was a very clear, I guess, stamp where I felt even more different because being Chinese and in a quite a white dominated kind of county that I was in, the town I was in, that made me stood out a bit more, as well as being an all girls school. That made me kind of think about, I'm very different to everyone else, even more different. But it never really gave me like a I guess I never felt that I was isolated. I just felt I was different, and didn't know quite how to explain it. Um, I'm very into sports, and playing sports in an all-girls school is also a very weird thing to go for as a transgender person, because sports itself is still a very, even though it's for everyone and it's one of the biggest things in the world, but it's still quite an old-fashioned kind of area in the world where, because sports is such a long history, a lot of the rules or kind of how they are categorized or how it's being set up is still very binary. So in a sense where it's always girl sports and there's boy sports and there's all this stuff and there's different uniforms you wear when you play certain sports. So for me, it was a lot of the time, even though sports is kind of where I felt safe, I felt it was a safe space where I can express myself, I can really be myself, I can run around and be a bit more aggressive and do this kind of stuff. But I was still in at the same time kind of restricted to wear a skirt because it was like a girl sport and all that kind of stuff. So it was definitely like a weird thing to go through. It was at the same, both at the same time. Really enjoyed it, but at the same time, there was some painful bits like in the changing rooms and whatnot that made me feel even a bit that I needed to hide myself a little bit, if that makes sense. And yeah, but I think for me, I was luckily that I think because I went to the UK, I was so young, I was able to kind of fit in and make friends quite easily because I played sport as well, and I was a bit more younger. So the people around me, I never really had too much of a, I guess, abuse from people. Obviously, you still get abuse being a Chinese in a foreign country 10, 20 years ago, but not to the sense where people around me were like that. And I felt okay enough and I felt safe enough to be quite open with my friends. So a lot of my close friends, actually, we talked about this when I was like 15, 16, that I told them that one day when I'm older, this is what I want to do, and I've got my own money, when I've got this. So like all the friends I grew up with, they actually was quite aware of this is what I was feeling. Maybe none of us understood fully what exactly that meant, including myself, but they were quite okay with the fact that that is what I feel, and eventually this is going to happen at some point in my life. So yeah, so I've been very open with people around me, and then I guess it was kind of the same state where I was socially kind of have transition where people would kind of see me as a guy in the streets. People often would kind of address me as Mister or Sir, and now before I kind of started my medical transition. So socially, I was pretty much kind of behaving like a boy or a guy or whatever that means, right? And yeah, and then maybe I've always thought in my head is that I want to do it my own way. I wanted to have my own money before I start the procedure. So I've always told myself that I want to do the process or finish the entire process by the time I'm 30. And like many things, a lot of people say, oh, I'll just do it when I'm older, I'll do it when I've got the time, I've got the energy, I've got the money, it's too hard right now. So I waited, and time flies when you don't really think about it. So I think it was when I was 25, which was about 2 years ago, I was like, okay, I've always said 30, and I've got a 5 year before I get to 30. It's time to really kind of start looking at, exactly what are the steps, exactly how long it takes, exactly what it all means. Because in my head, when I was younger, you just think, and I think the same thing as well, when you think about, getting into shape, you think, I'll just go to the gym. I'll just go to the gym once and then I'll just be in shape forever, right? That's the general thing you think, oh, by the time I do it, it just be very easy. So I never really looked into any of that. I never looked into the process, the medical side of it, exactly who to speak to, all that kind of stuff. So it took me a while to really understand the landscape of it. And because the friends that I've had around me, a majority are cisgender and straight, so I was never really exposed as well to the general LGBT community. So when I was 25, I was kind of like all at once learning all these pronouns, what are pronouns, what are the different gender expressions and all that kind of stuff. That was all quite new to me. And I only learned those stuff maybe 2-3 years ago, which I guess generally people would kind of assume people who are in the LGBT community would know everything about the LGBT community, but that is the most, that could not be further from the truth. So it took some time to kind of research and look into what are the actual steps I need to take. And then once I've got kind of some doctor's appointments on the way, it was where you basically, it's a process where you have to kind of see someone to get a referral letter to a specialist, like you would for any other kind of health reasons, and they do evaluations on you and ask you a bunch of questions to make sure you understand and you're fully aware what are the repercussions and what you're going into, what you're committing yourself into. They ask kind of your backgrounds and things, and they basically have these all like assessments to do, and just to make sure that you understand fully what it is that you're about to do. So I passed that fairly quickly, and then we're starting to do the medical stuff, and then it was just before that the medical stuff would start to kick in, so having hormones and things where the body would physically change, was that I felt like, okay, I need to kind of let people in the general public know as well, because my name would be changed, my face was slightly changed, my voice was changed obviously. So that was when I kind of decided to write that post on LinkedIn, to let people know, because I'd rather it come from me rather than kind of people guessing like, oh, what's Emery doing, all this kind of stuff. So that's kind of how it all kind of played out. It was quite a long process if I kind of explained it, but to me, it was a very natural thing that I was always going to do. So it might sound like, I think people who might be aware of this community or this kind of process, it might sound like a bit of a chore. It might sound like it's a long process and there's a lot of doctors and whatnot. But for me, because I was always quite sure I wanted to do it, and I've always accepted the fact that it was going to be a very long and kind of complicated thing. So it was really easy in relative terms for me to kind of go through it. So I think it's all about kind of setting an expectation, kind of what you're expecting, and that helped me a lot to go through it.
Wow. Like you mentioned, it's just a natural thing for you to just have to go through it. But for me, being someone listening to it, it's like, that's a long process. And like you said, like you thought, oh, it would just be like going to the gym once and you'll be in shape. But like, it's like a process where it continues pretty much. But through listening to this, I was just wondering, like you mentioned, oh yeah, I knew for sure, like at 15, 16 that, oh, I want to do this, I feel this way, and that's great. But what is there like a defining point or something that happened that was like that helped you be like, yes, this is why I feel so strongly about this? It's like, is there a moment or like a thing that happened that caused you to be like this?
Yeah, I get asked quite a lot, and I never really know how to answer because I just always knew. I can't really explain it, but I just know, like, I just see myself as a boy, and it's the same way as when I was younger. I think when you start to have, crushes and whatnot. Generally speaking, I don't know how old everyone can when they've had their first crush, but some people can be as young as in nursery, for a really small crush, into your first boy or first girl. So it's that early you actually start to kind of think about sexuality. And there's obviously a big argument about, oh, kids shouldn't have the power to decide what they want to do or how they feel about someone in a romantic sense. But if we all think about it, it is actually as early as we were 3-4 years old, and so that was how certain I was. But as I mentioned, obviously didn't have the words for it, so it was something that I just knew. But maybe when I was maybe around sort of 14, 15, where you start to have kind of romantic relationships, and you start to kind of have boyfriends and girlfriends around the people around me at that kind of age, and I'd never really been with a boy, and so I've only been with girls, and a lot of times that people would just kind of say, "Oh, you're a lesbian then," and I was like, I guess so. I wasn't like saying no because it is, girls with girls, but then it never felt it was like a thing that fully explained how I felt or how I identify with myself. So I used to be able to get really frustrated that I wasn't able to kind of explain further. Okay, maybe no, this is not what I wanted to be identified as, because that's just not how I feel. But maybe when I was maybe in university, where you have more Instagram and Facebook and all that kind of stuff, where I actually saw a bit more things online, I'm like, oh, actually that's how I feel. That's exactly what I want to do. I didn't even know when I knew when I was younger that I knew I was a boy. I never knew you can become a boy one day. I never knew that was an option. I never knew that was something that you can do. So I think, it's really kind of being a bit more exposed to the internet, and looking at certain things, and then realizing, that if I feel stuck in this way, there's actually a solution for me to go past it.
Yeah, and you mentioned how you always knew like, oh, I feel this way and I am this. And you kind of mentioned how you kind of let your like close friends know that that's how you feel. But how about in terms of your like close kind of friends or like family members that they just kind of knew as well when you were at that point, or it was kind of a slow process of you letting them know, or like they can feel like kind of like the transition from you being like, oh, I am feeling this way, but to actually like, oh, I feel this way and I'm going to do something about it. Like, how
Mm.
was that like?
Yeah, I think a lot of the times I think people can kind of sense it because I guess when you were kind of coming to the age where you're 15, 16, where you start to buy your own clothes, you start to kind of get your own haircuts and whatnot, it was very apparent that what I chose to wear, what I chose to buy was very different to what my parents had chose for me to wear and hair and things like that. And obviously, it wasn't like the easiest kind of conversation to have. I never really spoke about it to my parents because well, one, because I kind of grew away from them in boarding school, so we didn't really have that chance to kind of have those conversations that often when I was only like 2 months being back in the whole entire year. Um, and I think they kind of saw me, my hair getting shorter and shorter, my clothes were starting to change. Basically, it was going through a phase where I changed my entire wardrobe in a space of, let's say, like 2 years. But again, I think that's the same with a lot of people. So when you are in that age, you're also finding your own style, and you're also finding out what you like wearing, what you don't like wearing. So to me, that was how I saw it was very much what everyone else has going through in terms of finding their style, finding their voice, finding how they want to present themselves. But obviously now I understand to other people that was a more of an extreme version, if you like, in terms of finding your own style. But that's kind of how I always saw it. So I think in my head, I thought it was like a gradual process, especially to my parents, and the way I dress, the way I am, and I was quite open saying that I am into girls. I do have a girlfriend, and then blah blah blah. So I think a lot of the times they kind of assumed that was the kind of the last step. That was the last kind of that was kind of the end point, if you like, and that's kind of who I am now. And I can understand that because when I was younger, I didn't know there was an extra step or there's an other solution you can go on to. So that to me, at first, obviously, you get frustrated because you don't know why don't they understand. As for any teenagers and their parents, you don't understand me, all this kind of stuff, right? And so that was exactly kind of how I felt. But now, obviously, a bit more older looking back, I'm like, yeah, okay, I get it. I understand why they were so maybe not open to the idea, especially kind of being quite an Asian traditional kind of household. But yeah, so I sat them down really, would have been 2 years ago now before I started the whole kind of medical side of things to say that again is because obviously it was going to be a very noticeable change when my voice was changing. So that really was a really conversation to be had. So I kind of sat them down and said, okay, this is what I'm planning to do. And I've always felt this way, but I've never knew how. So now I'm a bit more older. I feel like I'm comfortable to kind of proceed with this. The reaction obviously wasn't. I don't think any parents would be, having fireworks and being over the moon and all that kind of stuff, right? But I think they were okay enough. Given the fact they have zero idea about LGBT, they have zero knowledge about all this kind of stuff. So it was okay. And obviously it took some time for them to really digest it all. And both my parents are retired. They're slightly older as well. So there was obviously some difficulty for them to really digest the whole idea and kind of, I guess it's really about they've had this picture of me in their head and the vision of how I was going to grow up from the day I was born. And I just kept going kind of away, even further away from what they imagined. So it is hard to take because, I've been there, I guess, their daughter for about 20 odd years. And then now I'm going to be their son, if you like. So that's a big thing for them to adjust as well. But, I think it was lucky because the clinic that I go to for my appointments is very close to where my parents live, and they both retired. So actually, I do invite them to my doctor's appointment sometimes to kind of show them nothing weird happens here. It's just a very usual doctor thing. It's exactly the same hospital where you go to for your checkups. I think that really helped them to kind of demystify kind of what happens, right? They were able to see it firsthand, what I get my medicine from, all that kind of stuff. So that really helped. But obviously there's still bits and pieces that that happens is a bit hard to explain. But I think they've been more than what I wanted them to do, and then that's enough for me.
That's great. I'm happy to hear like how they kind of talk upon the news and kind of like their journey in terms of like understanding, also accepting and all that stuff, given their like traditional Chinese kind of conservative kind of mindset, being in Asia still, being Hong Kong, where LGBTQ stuff are still like, yeah, there's a awareness there, but there's still a lot of stigma and stereotypes, and also especially for trans issues for sure, especially when it comes to like, oh, if it's a transition from like male to female, that kind of stuff is still very taboo or and such.
Yeah.
And talking more about like kind of overall kind of trans issue in Asia, like what have you noticed kind of the things that no education wise still lacking in terms of trans issue in Asia as a whole that you have noticed that you want people to be more aware of?
Yeah, that's the one thing that I really think about quite a lot as well. Just kind of throughout my days, that I would really love to do more things about the advocacy in, especially not just LGBT, but especially trans as well, because obviously that's where I feel the most comfortable speaking about. And I think the trouble is with kind of being Asia is that obviously the culture that's been embedded in terms of the I guess the values and stuff is quite different to what I guess what LGBT plus stands for in some sense. So, for example, the boy or the male always have to provide, the female should stay at home. All that kind of stuff still already exists in Asia, and even in my generation, in my age, that a lot of girls or a lot of people still expect kind of the boyfriend to pay for everything or pay for most things on dates and things like that. So that really, I guess, in some ways go quite differently compared to what the LGBT plus kind of stand for. So there is definitely some parts of the culture does not help kind of spreading the awareness of LGBT plus. And the other thing I think is because the language, the vocab, it's not really there in Chinese. It's not really there in Cantonese. There are terms for it, but because Cantonese is such a what I think Cantonese, a lot of it's actually to do is slangs, right? It's made of a lot of slangs. You don't really say the way you speak in Cantonese and the way you write in Cantonese is very different. It's almost kind of like a two language, right? So even though the formal scientific terms are there, it's very hard to use those terms in a very everyday language setting. So I think that's the reason why it's quite hard to talk about, because the vocab is just not there. Is you can't really express what you want to say. That because I grew up away in the UK, so I know there's more vocabs in the English in the world. But I still see kind of when you speak about those topics, it's very hard to use the right words because it is quite specific, and it's very hard to get the right terms as well, even just in English, let alone having a language where they don't typically talk about these kind of things.
Yeah, and like I mentioned this before, and I feel the same way in regards to talking about mental health issues in like Asian languages as a whole, or especially in our context, like Cantonese or like Mandarin, like it's really hard, and
Yeah.
sometimes it's not worth that, like just going through like, oh, let's get all the scientific terms, because even if you do that, people are still gonna be giving you question marks. Like
Yeah.
I don't get it.
And I think it's a
And
turn off, right, when you use those really like
clinical
scientific
terms.
terms. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned like how like the education is that's not there, or like it's still lacking just because of the language aspect. But can you just talk also about how it's like being part of the LGBTQ like community in Asia, what it's like in terms of stereotypes, stigma and stuff? Has it like, do you feel like it's really different compared to when you were in the West when you were studying?
Yeah, in some ways, I think since I've kind of started to do all this like stuff about LGBT plus communities, that I've realized that the community is massive in Hong Kong. It is a massive community, but the only thing I think is because the only thing I think, even though we've got a big community, but it's not where I think it should be in terms of the general awareness of it, is because not many people are willing to speak about it. They're not really willing to be on a record saying they're gay, lesbian, or whatever it may be. They think they identify themselves with. So it's really hard to get the awareness when you don't have like a real life example. So someone who's willing to be on camera, be on the record, and talk about those things. There's definitely more and more now in the past kind of year that I can see. But I think given kind of how big the community is, I think there's so much more we can do in terms of spreading the awareness. And I think kind of people kind of being in this community is that um, it's also to do with kind of what Hong Kong's like, the infrastructure of the city. Because if they go on the record and say certain things on camera, they a lot of people still live at home with their parents. There's a big thing about what if my parents see. Whereas I'm lucky enough where I live alone. I don't really have that kind of pressure where I'm with my parents all day long. I have to think about that every day. So I think a lot of it is to do with how small a city is, and how much of a, I guess, how easy it is to run into people in Hong Kong. So basically there's a lot of barriers and challenges for people to speak up in Hong Kong, I feel.
I think it also comes down to like, oh, you have to come out again in a more public setting, and people are not willing to do so, just given of like what risk or just like repercussion that might happen as a result, whether it's like home life or like work life. Because I think
Exactly, yeah.
legal wise it's still not really well protected to be
Yeah, I
LGBTQ kind
think
of stuff.
legal wise, it's not illegal,
Hmm.
but it's not legal, if that makes sense. It sounds very confusing, but it's not legal, but it's not illegal. So it's kind
Hmm.
of in kind of grey areas, like what is it exactly in terms of from a legal perspective, and like you said, what you mentioned quite rightly as well, is also the legal side of things is not there, so it's very easy to say bad things about it because the law is not protecting kind of the LGBT community. And when it comes to kind of same-sex marriage, I actually spoke to someone recently in Hong Kong about this. Is that they work in law, and what they mentioned was that a lot of people are against it because once, let's say, if they do approve same-sex marriage in Hong Kong, that also opens up to a lot of doors when you can apply for housing, when you can apply for certain rights and benefits. And some people don't want that because Hong Kong, the resources we have already is not enough as it is. So there's a lot of people who are against it purely because they don't want to open doors for people who can also kind of share that benefits, which obviously to me is an awful thing to think about or to say, because why does that make me less why does that then make me have less benefits? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think now come raise a question of, in your kind of perspective of how Hong Kong is and how the whole LGBTQ thing that's happening in Hong Kong, do you think it's like something where for those that are in the community, when they think of housing, when they think of a family and stuff, they will have to think about moving to somewhere else that's more feasible for them? Like I know people, or at least I read about often, like about those that are in the LGBTQ community in Singapore. Their thing is like are out to like live the life that they want is to move overseas, where
Yeah, exactly.
no, housing is not an issue just because we're in the community. Because in Singapore, it's very much so like a issue where they aren't able to get housing for most part if they are part of the community, if they want to build a family in that way, right?
Yeah. And yeah, the first question, like you said, is the first question people say, oh, where are you going to get married? Because you can't do it here. So you got to think about like you have to kind of think about the next steps before you kind of, I guess, come out to your parents or come out to people that in your community. And it's a big thing in Hong Kong because housing already is such a bad situation here in Hong Kong. It's so ridiculously expensive. So people, I guess, is there's just too many barriers from a society standpoint, not just socially, but in terms of how the infrastructure is in Hong Kong, and that adds on more pressure to the social side of things.
Talk a lot about like the social side or the legal side. I want to talk about like how the perception of the community is in terms of, first, I guess the older generation, but also the youth. I assume the youth have a certain idea of it, but of course there's still a lot of stereotypes and all that such. Could you just talk about how you have seen their perception is towards these
Yeah.
issues?
Yeah, the old generation, I think, obviously, from my experience anyway, is still, I think, the general. This might sound a bit funny, but the general kind of, I think, impression that I get, they think, is that we understand it exist, we will allow it, we will let you exist, but that can't happen to my kid.
Mm,
That
yeah.
can't happen to my family. But if it's your friends, then oh yeah, that's cool. I don't really care. But when it comes to your family, then they're like, no, 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 which obviously is not really accepting it, right? So that's what I find quite funny sometimes, is that they are okay with it, but they're not okay with it when it's you. So that's kind of the general thing that I still feel they have, and I think a lot of them I think a lot of them still think that it's still against the values they have in terms of having kids, having, you know, a family. And I think the general kind of misconception is that people who are in the LGBT community don't want kids or can't have kids. That is completely not true, because you can choose to adopt, you can choose to have surrogate, you can even do anything that you want to do, and you can you know, kind of make that happen if you want to. And that's actually the same thing as a heterosexual couple. Like, do they have to have kids? And what if they can't have kids? Some people just they can't have kids because of the biological reasons. So to me, that is exactly the same thing. But I think the most kind of the most obvious, or the easiest reason they can go against is that, oh, you don't want kids, but you should have kids because that's what we believe in as a Chinese family value. So that's kind of what I think about what the older generation thinks. I think then people, I guess my generation in their kind of late 20s, early 30s, kind of the millennials, if you like, I think generally speaking, are quite open to it. You know, there's not much of a huge issue that I face anyway. But I think there's definitely still kind of quite similar to the old generation where, yes, we know it exists, we're aware of it, it's good, but when it's a stranger, it's easier for them to kind of judge them. But if it's someone, if you have a friend who are in the community, they are usually a bit more open to it. They are quite happy to have that relationship as a friend. But I definitely see kind of people kind of would be a bit more negative towards it when it's someone they don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think it just all boils down to the lack of awareness of what the community is, and also the education that they can get from as early as they could in terms of like these kind of issue regarding gender, sexuality, and all that stuff that probably wouldn't be that prevalent in any kind of classrooms,
Yeah.
especially in the East. Like West is starting to open up a little bit, but then for the Eastern world, it's like it's still quite taboo to talk about these issues in the classroom setting. And I think we need more of that, so
Yeah,
that, you know,
absolutely.
the stigma and the stereotypes and also just people being like uncomfortable with it will be less. Because I think it all boils down to like not being comfortable with things that you're not like just used to or just aware of from an early age. Because I think if people start getting exposed to it earlier on, then by the time they turn into their 20s, it won't be something new that they need to learn. It'll just be, oh, it's just what it is.
Yeah, exactly. I had this really kind of nice and kind of heartwarming encounter recently. So I play in the football team, and I still play in the ladies team. And that's just because of the legal side of things. I can't change my gender as of yet. So basically, I still play in the ladies team. And in our team, is a lot of mums on our team. And it's an amateur league that we play in. So there's a lot of mums, and they bring their kids to the games. And one day, one of the kids asked her mum, saying, "Oh, why'd you have a boy in your team? Like, what is everyone's a girl? So why is there just one boy?" And the mum kind of explained that, "Oh, well, sometimes girls want to be boys, and sometimes boys want to be girls." I think that kid must have been about maybe like 5 or 6 years old, so obviously still very young. And she was just like, "Oh, okay, that's my question answered." And the next week she went home and then told her mum about what she saw in the classroom. She said to him that, "Oh, mummy, I saw a boy today dancing like a girl. Maybe he wants to be a girl too." And that to her was just like, "Oh yeah, that happens." So like you said, like if we knew all about this stuff when we were in school, I don't think there's going to be any problem or any issues. There might still be some kind of misconception and myths and whatnot, but not as bad as kind of what we are kind of experiencing now.
And I think it also comes down to people being so scared, like, oh, we got to teach kids like all the, extreme or not extreme, but like, more graphic things that they assume is like sex education. But, sex education as a whole is, a lot to do, at least in the younger age, in my opinion, should be on consent, on knowing body
Yeah.
parts and know how to like differentiate between what they like and don't like and that kind of stuff. But I think they take it to the extreme where we're just teaching them how to have sex, but that's not the case at all.
Exactly. I think sex probably, I mean, it's still now, right? There's like I guess like there's some more acceptance to talk about it now, but I think there's still like a taboo where we can't really talk about sex openly. And a lot of the times I kind of feel sex is kind of been put into quite a negative light, quite like a shady, dodgy thing that happens. But I mean, everyone does it, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a very normal thing. That's how I'm here. That's how you're here. That's how everyone
Yeah.
else in the world are here. So why do we need to hide about it? Why can you only know about it when you're 18 or whatever age it is? And kids as young as they are 3 or 4, they ask, where do babies come from, right? And it's a very natural thing to ask. So I think the more you hide it, and it's the more you kind of say you can't talk about it, the more you want to know. And that's the same thing as like when you're in the classroom, teachers say, "Oh, you don't laugh." That makes you want to laugh more, right? So like, why close that door? Why don't we just kind of be open and just let people know this is what happens, because it is what happens in the world, and I think it's better to know about it before you are into the world when you're working, right?
Yeah, I think being more sex positive is a good thing, and it helped open doors to you being less kind of afraid of things that you don't do or you haven't
Hmm.
done before. Because I think most, or well, I shouldn't say, well, at least that's how I feel like with like Asia or like con specific, a lot of like just being afraid of certain things in terms of like sexuality and stuff, or like just with like, oh, things that is not, I guess, mainstream for them. It's just because it's not they're not in an environment where it's sex positive, where they're taught or like they're shown that, oh, it's okay for other things to exist even if you don't
Exactly.
do it. I think that's the
Exactly,
biggest
yeah.
thing.
And I think it also kind of helps the kind of the whole stereotype of what a boy should be and what a girl should be like. And that also reflects in the real world, where how a woman should behave at work, how a man should behave at work. I think with kind of sex education from a young age, it will also kind of help people and kind of break the glass ceiling of what female can achieve in a workplace.
Yeah, so much to kind of unfold and unpack, and like this issue of like, sex, gender, like, and like gender roles and all those stuff. And I've been
Mm,
having such a great time like learning from you and hearing your experience. But to kind of wrap up the show and just kind of like give people more to think about, like what are some things you feel like I don't want to say like people should be more sensitive to when they're like dealing with those that are maybe transitioning or just transgender. Like, are there things that you think people can do a lot better to be more sensitive towards how they approach people in the community,
yeah,
or
yeah,
just
yeah.
going through those experiences?
Yeah, I think when I wrote the LinkedIn post, and then when I was kind of going through a stage where I was telling like people who are in my wider circles, that about kind of this new change I'm having, I think there was a couple of kind of the most common thing was that people were either have no idea what to say to you, or they feel very afraid to ask questions, or they will make mistakes in terms of the pronouns and whatnot, and they get very scared, so they avoid kind of talking about it. But basically, the way I see it is that if I have spoken about it, if I've come out, which I do hate this word coming out, because I think it also implies that there's a definite timeline, and then it never is. I think it's a kind of ongoing thing. So I think we do need a better word for it eventually. I don't know what word it is, but that's my take on coming out. But essentially, if I've come out, if I've said this, then that to me indicates that I can talk about it. You can come and ask me questions if you want to. Um, and also, if people make mistakes about, calling my kind of previous pronouns or my previous names, obviously it's not great. But if you know you've done it wrong, just apologize and move on. Because some people really kind of, they say it wrong once and then they make themselves like they feel very conscious about it, and then every single time afterwards they're like, oh yeah, I know your name is now this, and kind of make an emphasis on kind of the mistake. But I think a lot of times it's just, if you know you made a mistake, apologize and then just move on, and that's kind of it. And I think generally speaking, I think most people are quite open to talk about it. So if you are genuinely quite curious about it, I don't see any harm asking questions. Obviously, you can ask it in a polite way. The same goes with asking about someone about their personal life. You can't just be like, "Oh, why did you do this?" You gotta ask it in a like a genuine human way when you're genuinely interested, right? You gotta shape the questions in the right way. So I think it's just the same as any other topics about hard things in life, that you should approach it in the right way. Um, and I think there's also a big thing that I've also learned is that not every transgender person will have the same experience or have the same process done in terms of medical as well. So I think there's an assumption where as soon as you come out of trans, automatically your body is changed from day one to day two. And that's not true. And some people decide to do everything. Some people decide not to. Some people decide just to kind of transition socially and not have any kind of hormones or not have anything done. So it does also depend on the person as well. So it's always that I find it's a bit difficult because people don't know, right? But that's the same thing as I don't ask anyone about what their body looks like, right? So why should you ask what their body looks like? So I understand the kind of the natural kind of question that you may have, but that's the same thing that basically what I'm trying to say is that don't ask questions or don't say words that you wouldn't normally say to another person. If that's kind of the long story short.
Be a decent person.
Yeah, exactly. Just be nice and be sensible, right? And we don't bite. We're not going to hit you or anything like that. If anything, we're scared to be hit. So just be open, and if you actually care about it, ask in your genuine question. And I think that's kind of it. I think a lot of people kind of are scared to ask questions because they don't know what to expect. But I think people are generally quite open about it.
That's great. And again, thank you so much for sharing your story and like providing your insight and your knowledge on the topics. And hopefully people listening will learn some things about the community and just the issues here through this podcast and seek out more information if they're inclined to. And before we really do end this podcast, I would like to know the future of your podcast and your goals on like what to do content creating wise, because I think you kind of have transcended beyond just a podcaster. You can be a public speaker, you can create content in some other way. So can you just talk about your goals for content creating and being who you are as like a podcaster and more?
Yeah, that's a great question because that's exactly what I'm figuring out at the moment. Because things has changed obviously since I first started kind of the podcast and kind of doing my own thing and doing more online things. I'm definitely marked a day in my calendar, a day or two, actually, to sit down and kind of look through everything I've done and kind of deciding what to do in the future. But in terms of the general idea, I think really is to really keep motivated because in podcasting it's very easy to, because it is down to us. It's very easy to just say, I'll skip this week, I'll skip next week, I'll come back, and then all that kind of stuff, right? So it's making sure that I'm still quite consistent in terms of pumping out content, kind of having that foundation still there because I'm only roughly about a year in podcasting and it's still very early days in terms of the whole podcasting world. So I want to keep at it. And I think the podcast I want to keep it going as long as I can, but I think definitely I'll be more to do kind of more speaking stuff because I kind of realized that I really enjoy it, even though it was the most stressful thing I've ever experienced, doing a TED Talk and being on stage. I honestly don't remember much of it. It was a very out of body experience, but somehow I still feel like I enjoyed it. So I want to keep doing things like that. And I think, even though I'm still at a stage where I'm still finding it sometimes uncomfortable showing my face and kind of talk about me all the time. And I think we were talking about this before as well off air, is that we both kind of don't really love the idea of kind of, putting ourselves up there. But I think it's more about making sure that I still feel the need to do it because I've seen the result of doing so. Like I've had kids, I have people coming up to me after the TED Talk, the students there saying that, sending me an Instagram message afterwards saying, thank you for saying all this. I have no idea about this kind of stuff. I'm also kind of exploring, my sexuality. So this has really helped me. And it's just like, you just never know who this person's going to help. I had someone coming up to me saying that your podcast really helped me through kind of a point in my life where I didn't know what to do with my career and life in general, and that's really helped me to carry on and find out what it is that I want to do. So I think is more kind of putting myself not as a focus, kind of thinking that I'm just kind of the messenger, if you like, and kind of providing this information online, and then just keep going at it. But generally speaking, I would love to kind of do more content and just be a bit more comfortable and a bit more confident when I post things, because when I post things, I throw it away my phone, I turn off my laptop for like the next hour. I don't look at it until like an hour later at least, because I just still feel quite self-conscious. But hopefully next year I can kind of overcome. I don't think I'll ever overcome it, but hopefully I just want to overcome it a bit more than I do now. And then hopefully when I have that confidence, have that foundation built, then I can push on and do more things. But I think creating content and kind of sharing more kind of authentic story around the world is just what I want to keep doing in the foreseeable future.
And I can't wait to see all the future things that you'll be doing, because I think you'll be doing a great job doing whatever you want to do, because I've seen your growth and I've seen like what you said you want to do, and you're doing it right now. And
Thank you.
I hope nothing but the best for you, and interested to see where all these things lead for you. And for those that want to find your content, follow you, and learn from you, where can they find you, and what future things can they expect from you? Let's say your tech talks and such.
Yeah. So yeah, TED Talk will be up hopefully in the next few weeks, I think. But I'll definitely be sure to always share that around on my platforms. Platform wise, Instagram and LinkedIn are my two common places that I post content on. So Instagram would be efung94, EFUNG94. LinkedIn will be my name. So if you just search Emery Fung, that usually is the first one. I don't think there's many people who's got the same name as me, so it's easy for people to find me on LinkedIn. And then if you also want to know a bit more about kind of behind the scenes stuff and whatnot, I also have a website where I also do newsletters. Not very often. I'm trying to get a bit more regular on it. But yeah, if you could just go to my website, which is Awkward Turtle Pod .page, that will lead you to sign up to newsletters, and that's to do with a bit more kind of behind the scenes work that I do, or any kind of new updates before I put it on Instagram and LinkedIn. That's where I usually kind of post things about the next project I'm doing. But yeah, I've got a few more kind of speaking stuff in the future. I've got a few more kind of interviews coming out in the next couple of weeks. So there'll be more of me around the internet. I hope I don't bombard everyone with all my information and my story.
No, for sure they will appreciate it and look forward to it. And again, thank you so much for coming on, sharing your story, and talking with me again. And really nice having this chat with you. And again, all the best to you. And again, thank you for listening. And I hope that people enjoy this conversation. And if you do, please give this episode a share to those that you think will benefit from it, and also follow the page on Instagram, or follow the podcast on Instagram at What Kind of Asian Pod, and connect with us. We'll love to hear from you. And till next time, bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.